Hello, Sooner Nation, OU Insider subscribers, Coach Bryan Clinton fanatics, film breakdown lovers. Those two things go along with each other. People who are excited about the hires of Seth Littrell and John Finley as offensive coordinators. People who are confused about what's happened the last few days. There's a lot that's happened. This is the podcast for you. My name is Jesse Crittenden, host of the Oklahoma Drill podcast. It is fueled by the Rivals Network and OUinsider.com. I am, of course, joined by my co-host, Sir, Coach, Esquire, Sir, again, Bryan Clinton. Bryan, how are you doing over there in Collinsville, America?
Good, man. I've got a little bit of a head cold going on, but not too bad. Feeling all right.
It's that time of year, man. Like it felt warm outside yesterday, and now today it's all gloomy and cold and stuff. It's hard to imagine that like it's going to be December by the end of this week.
Yeah, that doesn't compute yet.
I think that's part of where the head cold stuff comes from, is like the weather keeps on going back and forth. Mm-hmm. I seem to remember as a kid that by November it was just really cold every day. Am I wrong about that?
Global warming, man.
It's climate change. That's actually what we're going to talk about today, not OU football. We're going to talk 50 minutes about climate change. Bryan, there has been so much that has happened since the last time we spoke. There was an OU football game where they beat TCU 69-45. That felt like that happened 6 years ago at this point, because since then, Bryan, Oklahoma found out that they are not going to be playing in the Big 12 title game after Oklahoma State came away with an overtime victory over BYU. That I left my family thing in Owasso early because BYU was up at halftime. And I was like, oh, shoot. Okay, emergency pod. I need to be riding. I got to get home. And by the time I got home, Oklahoma State had pulled away against BYU. Did you see that? I'm assuming you watched that.
I watched it from beginning to end. I mean, it was something else. I mean, I can't even put it into words.
But again, even that feels like forever ago, even though that was a big deal for Oklahoma not to make the Big 12 title game, because Jeff Lebby's gone. Bryan, I don't know if you heard the news. Jeff Lebby's is not. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to break that to you. Jeff Lebby's gone as OU's offensive coordinator after 2 seasons. He is now the head coach at Mississippi State. By Sunday night, he had been introduced, or he had landed in Starkville to a parade, similar to, Brent Venables arriving in Norman a couple of years ago. By Monday night, he had officially had his press conference. And then by Tuesday night, Bryan, Oklahoma officially promoted Seth Littrell as offensive coordinator, and they elevated John Finley as co-offensive coordinator. And this is pretty interesting because obviously Seth Littrell was hired as an offensive analyst at OU back in the spring. John Finley has been the tight ends coach for 3 seasons. The way everything seems, Bryan, Seth Littrell is going to come in kind of as the director, as the play caller and a quarterback's coach. And John Finley is going to see an elevated role in offensive game planning, game management, things like that. But Bryan, this has all happened so fast, but I think it's good to point out that I think this is kind of where this was heading. It was heading with Seth Littrell and John Finley both being promoted, basically. But there's been so much that's happened in the last few days. I think the place to start, Bryan, is we're going to talk about Jeff Lebby and everything in a little bit, but what can fans expect from Seth Littrell calling plays? I mean, he has experience as an offensive coordinator at Arizona, at Indiana, at North Carolina. He was involved in the offense while at North Texas as the head coach for 7 seasons. There's a lot of data to sift through. I wrote a story over at OUinsider.com, kind of digging into numbers. You did a film breakdown of Seth Littrell over at OU Insider's YouTube channel. Take it away as much as wherever you want to take it. Broad look. What can fans expect from Seth Littrell's tenure as offensive coordinator and play caller?
So I'm gonna use a metaphor here, because coaching trees. I think a tree is a really good way of putting that, because the roots, if you look to the roots and you see where Littrell has come from, you'll see where he's gone or where he's going as a play caller. And his mentors are Mark Mangino, Mike Leach, Kevin Wilson, and Larry Fedora. Over the span of time that he was a play caller, that's who he learned under. So the air raid roots are there. He comes from that same tree that we see most of what college football's passing game looks like now. It all originated from the air raid. We saw the rise of spread offenses over that time, making defenses cover every inch of the field. Those same concepts are still going to be something you see from Seth Littrell. Now, I will say during his time, at North Carolina, and then even whenever he was running, that just the head coach at North Texas, there was a good dose of 12 personnel. They like to have 2 tight ends on the field. There's still some RPO concepts that are going to be run. Look, long story short, what you saw from Jeff Lebby, there are still going to be lots of things used that we saw from Lebby's system. There's still going to be times where Oklahoma wants to use a little bit of tempo to keep the defense off kilter. Going whenever you're able to keep the same personnel out on the field and not give the defense chances to sub guys in. Obviously you can keep hitting on matchups that you like by doing that. The run game is going to be a power run game of some sort. I still imagine that there's going to be zone. There's still going to be pin pull concepts. You're still going to see a lot of things with that. But my hope and what I believe will happen is the basis of this offense being surrounding RPOs is going to draw back a little bit. I think you're going to see more designed runs. It's going to be more of a split whenever it comes to run or pass. Again, you'll still see RPOs because everybody runs them now.
Everybody does them.
I just don't think it's going to be as much. They're not going to be as fluent in it. It's not going to be something that they're doing on each and every play. And so like that, don't like that. That's personal preference. I personally think when an offensive line knows that it can come off the ball and drive guys off the ball and not have to worry about being too far downfield, I think that it helps in the run game. So that'll help. But you're still going to see play action. You're still going to see deep shots down the field. This is still going to be an offense that likes to spread things out and run the ball in those wider gaps because the defense is spread out. But toughness, grit, those are the kinds of things that you hear about Seth Littrell. So going into the SEC, I think it really aligns well with what Brent Venables is trying to build and the program he's trying to build on the backs of the kids that he's gotten there. It's going to be toughness. It's going to be determination. It's going to be lining up and beating the guy in front of you. That's what Seth Littrell's always been about. He's a fullback at the end of the day. That's what he played in college. So I think that kind of shows through in his play calling, and I'm here for it.
There's a lot of good stuff there, Bryan, and I probably should have mentioned, and you kind of touched on it there. There are going to be some similarities with the offense OU ran under Jeff Lebby, and I think there's a lot more connections than that too. I mean, obviously Jeff Lebby, OU, this is his alma mater. He has playing experience here. So does Seth Littrell. Obviously, he was a team captain for the OU team that won the national title in 2000. Obviously, Joe John Finley also played at OU. To me, when you kind of take all of that into consideration, and then also some of the similarities in their offenses, to me, it's pretty clear that Brent Venables wanted consistency. He wanted continuity. And not that everything's going to be the same thing as you just mentioned. Not every part of the offense is going to be the same, but to me, both the connections to the program and the way they like to run offenses, I think there's obvious continuity there. And I think he did prioritize that with not only the comfort of the players currently on the roster, and I think all of this starts and ends with Jackson Arnold, right? That is what it's all about, is making him happy. But also moving into the SEC made this not a normal coaching change, and I think it did make continuity more of a focus. But Bryan, I was going through the numbers. I mean, you even look at Jeff Lebby's offense this last season. I mean, they're third in the country in points per game. OU was during the regular season, 10th in yards per game. They're at the top of every category in terms of explosive plays. I mean, plays of 10 yards or more, 20 yards or more, 30 yards or more. When you look at Seth Littrell's offenses, a lot of that is the same. I mean, I in my story, I took a look at probably what were the three best offenses of his tenure: 2013 at Indiana, 2015 at North Carolina, 2017 at North Texas. I mean, across the board, explosiveness, explosive plays, total yards, points per game. I mean, that North Carolina team in 2015 in particular, I mean, they averaged 41 points per game. They were fourth in the country in plays of 20 yards or more. 95 plays of 20 yards or more. I think those are similar. Those things are similar, and also, kind of the time of possession. I know you looked at my story last night. Time of possession. I think historically, Seth Littrell's offenses haven't controlled the pace, or not controlled the pace. They haven't controlled the time of possession. They haven't won the time of possession battle, which kind of goes back and forth. I think time of possession has become one of those things that it's not necessarily a natural barometer of valuing success, but going through some of those numbers too, Bryan. I mean, he's had teams that ranked 122nd in time of possession, 128th, 127th. The thing that seems the most different to me, Bryan, is, like you mentioned, Jeff Lebby historically has relied a little bit more on the running game, where Seth Littrell historically has relied a little bit more on the passing game. But those last 3 years at North Texas, they did run the ball a little bit more than they passed. So I guess turning it back to you, I think when you have Jackson Arnold, you mentioned maybe the decrease in RPOs, things like that. Do you think we'll see a little bit more of an air raid, pass first kind of mindset with Jackson Arnold, or do you rely a little bit more on the power running game with someone like Gavin Sawchuk? Not to mention Jackson Arnold can run the ball as a quarterback. What do you see from that dynamic?
So I think a lot of that's probably going to come down to personnel, because I think throughout his time in charge of offenses, you have seen him do a really good job. And this is something that Jeff Lebby was really good at, was picking on mismatches, taking matchups that you like and really hammering those home. And so, it was really interesting. I was kind of diving through some old interviews of his back at his time during his time at Indiana under Kevin Wilson, and some things whenever he was under Larry Fedora. And one of the quotes from him that really stuck out to me was somebody asked him about how he maintains balance as a play caller. How do you maintain balance? And it was a really interesting answer. He said that, he didn't feel like a balanced offense was necessarily a 50% run, 50% pass, but it was more having explosive plays through the passing game and having successful plays in the running game. And if you have 70 or so plays a game that are successful in those two instances, then that was true balance to him. So I thought that was an interesting answer. Now, I will say that, I think as he progressed as a coach and over the years, just learned more and more. As you said, those last 3 years at North Texas, he did run the ball more. I think that defenses over the time that he has been a play caller have changed. Obviously, they ebb and flow. Offense obviously evolves and defense catches up. That's just how football goes over the years. And so I think that there's going to be opportunities in both. But I would say with the air raid background that he has, it's probably going to be closer to maybe what we saw with Lincoln Riley in town as far as run to pass. I think Lincoln was a little closer to 50% there than Lebby was. Lebby was definitely a little stronger on the run. So that'll be interesting. Having Joe John Finley, that's kind of something that I wanted to throw back towards you. The having a guy that has obviously been in Oklahoma for 3 years, familiar with the personnel, obviously very familiar with what Jeff Lebby did, coming over to Oklahoma from Ole Miss. having somebody like that knows the terminology the way that he does and can help Seth Littrell, transfer things over in the right terminology. Does that just help Oklahoma? Like, do you expect there to be less speed bumps, I guess, for those younger guys going into next year because they elevated JoJon Finley, or do you think that there's still going to be a learning curve for these guys?
I'm glad you mentioned JoJon Finley, because I think that it's easy to get him being elevated to co-offensive coordinator. I think that's easy for that to get lost when you hear Seth Littrell is the offensive coordinator and the play caller, quarterbacks coach, all that stuff. I think JoJon Finley getting elevated, I think, adds to the idea that Brent Venables wanted continuity. Because Brent Venables did his due diligence. He saw everything that we saw. It's the statistics between Jeff Lebby's offenses and Seth Littrell's really aren't that different. Time of possession is very similar. Plays per game is very similar. Explosive plays is very similar. But they're not the same. They're not the same thing. We've talked about some of the differences. So to me, I think it's like taking Seth Littrell, some of the similarities in the way he runs offenses, but maybe with some tweaks, right? Some differences. And then I think adding JoJon as a co-offensive coordinator, I think absolutely. I think it adds that continuity, because JoJon obviously the last 2 years has worked with Jeff Lebby. His tight ends had success under Jeff Lebby. Obviously Braden Willis a couple of seasons ago. To me, yeah, and when we talk about continuity and comfort, I think that absolutely starts with not only Jackson Arnold, but the rest of the roster. To me, this makes sense that they want to bring in a play caller with some similarities. Then you add JoJon Finley as to kind of cement that. Yep. I think, and to make things easier for the younger guys. To me, I think that could be where JoJon Finley is most useful, is taking Seth Littrell's play or some of his differences in the system and molding them into easily understandable things. Yep. For the rest of the roster. I mean, that's the way I see it. I think we're going to learn more when we inevitably talk to both these guys before the bowl game. But to me, JoJon, I think all of this is to say, I think OU likes the offensive infrastructure they've built the last 2 seasons.
Agreed.
There are criticisms about Jeff Lebby, and some of them are genuinely warranted. Late game play calling, situational football, complementary football, all that stuff. But to me, this is a signal of they like the infrastructure there. Yep. They like the blueprint there. And JoJon is there because he has experience in it. He can help with the players on the roster. And Seth Littrell is coming in as somebody with some similarities and maybe some much needed differences.
Yes.
That's the way I see it.
No, I agree 100%. Like, I'm excited about the philosophical changes of going for, and this may sound small, but going from a focus on tempo. I don't want to call it gimmicky, because that's not the right word, but you see a lot less tempo oriented offense in the SEC. It's not as prevalent as it is in the Big 12, but you still see good offenses. I mean, look what LSU is doing, what Alabama has become since they started out slow this year. Good offenses are still predicated on power run games and good play action played off of those in the SEC. And I think that Seth Littrell, he fits that really well. And with what Bill Bedenbaugh likes to do, things have looked a little different with Bill Bedenbaugh's offensive line the last couple of years. I don't know if that was if that was a change from what they were doing beforehand, but I do think knowing that those two guys are somewhat familiar with each other, I do think that this is a good thing and should be a good marriage as far as the offensive philosophy goes.
This episode of the Oklahoma Drill Podcast is brought to you in part by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. This weekend, folks, I'm a big Buccaneers fan. You know I got to roll with my boy Baker Mayfield, the former Sooner. They're up against the Panthers. The Panthers are terrible. I like Mayfield to end up with more than his projected points total. So you can play my entry or an entry of your own at Prize Picks. Testing your skills on Prize Picks this season is the most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports, because if you have the skills, you can turn $10 into $250 with just a few taps. Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So, go to prizepicks.com/insider and use code INSIDER for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, prizepicks.com/insider and use code INSIDER for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks, daily fantasy sports made easy. This episode of the Oklahoma Drill Podcast is brought to you in part by Manscaped. Merry Ballsmas from our friends over at Manscaped. The holiday season is approaching, and the perfect gift does exist. Who else to bring it down your chimney than the leaders in below-the-waist grooming? Keep calm and let your balls jingle this season with Manscaped's brand new Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. Included in this special sack is the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra, the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose trimmer, and Manscaped's liquid formulations. The gift of Manscaped doesn't stop there either. This bundle comes with 2 free gifts: Manscaped's Boxers 2.0 Premium Underwear and the Shed 2.0 Toiletry Bag. Look nice when you're going naughty by going to manscaped.com and use code OUinsider for 20% off and free shipping. Unwrap the gift of smoothness this season with Manscaped. That's 20% off and free shipping with the code OUinsider at manscaped.com. 20% off, free shipping when you go to manscaped.com and use code OUinsider. Manscaped, get your jingle balls ready for the holidays.
Yeah, and I think, again, it'll be interesting to hear Joe John speak specifically, because I think it's going to be interesting to dive into what exactly his day-to-day role is going to be. But to me, it just makes sense, his experience with coaching alongside Lebby. And to me, that and I think it's also worth pointing out that while Seth Littrell's offenses have had incredible quarterbacks. I mean, you think about Nick Foles in 2011. I mean, he led the Pac-12 in total offense. Obviously, Mason Fine, people from around Oklahoma will remember Mason Fine and what he was doing at North Texas, graduating as the all-time program leader in passing touchdowns and passer efficiency and yards and completions. I mean, he was absolutely insane there for a couple of years. I do think it's also important to know, like we said earlier, that I think we've seen that Seth Littrell is malleable. He's not committed to one thing specifically. And where I think it's hard to complain too much about OU's offense the last 2 years, especially this year with the numbers they put up. But I think it was pretty clear that come hell or high water, this offense was going to be based around RPOs. And we've seen, even before the last 3 seasons at North Texas, I mean, North Carolina, they ran the ball in 2015. They ran the ball more than they passed. We saw that. I mean, I think that maybe that added flexibility is going to be good too. And yeah, you're heading into a new conference where it's just going to be different. The styles of defense you're going to play, or that you're going to see, the caliber of athletes, the build of the athletes, opposing coaching staffs. I think to me, it's almost taking that infrastructure OU has and then tweaking it, which to me moves in kind of to an interesting discussion that Parker and I kind of talked about on Tuesday before the hires were made official, or the Littrell and Joe John Finley hires were official, which is, I think, talking about Jeff Lebby's, not legacy is too strong of a word, but how fans should feel about his tenure at OU. It's weird because, again, the numbers that the OU's offense has put up this year, it's hard to do much better than they did. And there were, I mean, the TCU game, again, that happened, feel like it happened 5 years ago. That TCU game was incredible offense. It just was. West Virginia, incredible offense. Texas, that game-winning drive, incredible offense. But whether it's some of the weird off the field stuff earlier in the year, I still think it's weird that we never got a full explanation as to why Jeff Lebby and Ted Roof's press conferences were canceled midway through the year, why their weekly press conferences were canceled. And then with the way he's left is also an interesting discussion, but also it's clear that with hiring Littrell and Joe John Finley, that they do want to continue some of the things that have already been built. So I guess for fans that maybe don't know how to feel or different ways to feel, what do you think Jeff Lebby, what's your takeaway from the last 2 years of Jeff Lebby? It's an interesting question, right?
Yeah, it is. I think the first thing to point out and to recognize is following the success that Lincoln Riley had as an offensive play caller here is an impossible situation for anyone. The sustained success that Lincoln Riley's offenses had over the 5 years before Jeff Lebby came in here into Norman, it was just unheard of. They were historic. If you look back at some of the numbers, it was just incredible what he was able to do with different quarterbacks over the time that he was here. But I will say, philosophy-wise, what Jeff Lebby did was successful. The numbers speak for themselves. I think the problem with that is the inconsistency in big moments, the inconsistency on the road from this team offensively. It just felt as if there were moments during his time in Oklahoma where he almost refused to just do the things that worked. I just, talking with a lot of people, I kept hearing the same comment about, he gets too cute. Like that was most people's hang up with him, with Jeff Lebby, was that he gets too cute. He doesn't do the things. They point back to the you need one first down against Kansas, you win that football game. That's one that we hear a lot, and it's the truth. I mean, there are times where you just sit back and wonder why are things called the way that they are? What's the thought process behind that? And I think that's probably more or less, you just have to realize he's not that experienced of a play caller. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Lane Kiffin was calling the plays despite him being the offensive coordinator there before he came to Oklahoma. Ole Miss's offense has continued to hum as Lane Kiffin's stuck around and has continued to call plays there. So I think you're seeing the first couple of years of a guy really having full reign of an offense. And think about it. He was under Lane Kiffin, and who was he under before that? He was under Josh Heupel. So these are two guys that are career play callers. It's a little different. Overall successful. I mean, you can look at his tenure and say successful, but I think the combination of him following Lincoln Riley and the Art Briles situation that seemed to tick off some of the fan base, and then you add to that the inconsistencies over the last 2 seasons that clearly cost Oklahoma some games. I think it kind of just becomes a wash. And I hate to call his time in Oklahoma a footnote, but that's kind of what it's going to end up being.
That's a really interesting way to put it, because I think in some ways OU doesn't make this hire of Seth Littrell and Joe John Finley without feeling confident about the way they've built the offense last 2 years. Right. At the same time, you're right. I mean, I think again, it's so weird to criticize an offense that put up the numbers that OU did this year. Right. I mean, again, they scored 43 points per game. It is weird. I mean, I think there were just moments where there were unacceptable mistakes. I mean, I even look at Oklahoma State and Kansas, both of those games. Forgive me, I saw a few different, I was going through the numbers for this column I was writing, and forgive me, I can't remember exactly where the sources were from, but there were a couple of sites that I looked at that actually do a post-game win expectancy stat, where it takes the stats for both teams and calculates it into a percentage about what team, if you were to play the game again with the same stats, who would win the game. OU, I think, was given a 69% chance to win the Oklahoma State game, and a 64% chance to win the Kansas game. So basically that saying that given the stats that both teams put up, OU should have won both those games. I think part of that is, again, some of the offensive issues, particularly in the second half of both games. I mean, I even did a breakdown of the drives that OU had in the second half against Kansas. It's just... Yeah, I think when it was good, it was great, it was great. And when it was bad, it was bad. Correct. And I think what OU's trying to do now is take the good from the last couple of years and make it more consistent with some tweaks to maybe help salvage some of that consistency, some of the late game issues, and maybe getting an experienced play caller like Seth Littrell helps in that regard. Maybe it does.
Yeah, I think if you took Brent Venables, set him down, and gave us some truth serum, he would. If you said, "All right, this is how good it was at its best, and this is how bad it was at its worst." If you drop this and bring this up to here, and you're staying in this area where it's more consistent, he's going to say, "Yeah, I'll take a less explosive offense for a more consistent offense," because more consistency obviously is going to give you more of an opportunity to win. So I think that's what you do get, and the congruence keeping the guys that they have in house. As you said, when it was really, really good, I mean, it was good, but the small few times that it was bad, I mean, it cost Oklahoma. So good way of putting it, for sure.
It's going to be interesting to see how he does at Mississippi State. I mean, this is a huge job that Jeff Lebby's taking on. I think, trying to take away a fan perspective, obviously fans, I think rightfully are going to have conflicted, weird feelings about Lebby's tenure and the way he left and all that stuff. Just objectively speaking, this is a huge job. He's making his first jump as a head coach to a team in the bottom of the SEC, a team that just finished 5-7, a team that over the last 5 years, I mean, again, 6-7, 4-7, 7-6, 9-4 2 seasons ago with Mike Leach, rest in peace, and then this past season that was a struggle. I think it's going to be interesting to take a guy that just had his first 2 years as an offensive coordinator and put him as the head coach of a team that's struggling to compete in the SEC. That's a huge job. The odds are kind of stacked against him. It's going to be interesting to see what he can do there.
Let me phrase it to you this way. Let me ask you this. When you're looking at the SEC, not from top down, but from bottom up, it's Vanderbilt at the very bottom right now.
Yeah.
Mississippi State's probably next after that.
Yeah.
And then after Mississippi State, is it South Carolina? Is it Arkansas? Whichever one those are. My point being, the gap between Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and then whoever that next school is wide. There's a big gap between Mississippi State and whoever that next school is, just as far as prestige. But the problem is, I think Mississippi State being in the SEC West with Alabama, with Mississippi, or with Ole Miss, with LSU, with Texas A&M, the expectations there are not going to be go 9-3, but they are going to be to go bowling. I mean, this is a fan base that wants to go. Well, they just fired their head coach for going 5-7. So Jeff Lebby's walking into a hornet's nest. I mean, a hornet's nest filled with cowbells at that. And it's a tough job. That's a really, really hard job. I mean, at least at Vanderbilt, if you go 3-9 or 2-10, like, well, we're Vanderbilt. Like, you can try it again next year. He's not going to get that at Mississippi State. And so it was an interesting decision. I mean, it was something that kind of left me scratching my head as to, is he really taking this job? And he's got a cabinet full of offensive playmakers going into the SEC. Why not wait and see how things play out? Maybe the Florida job comes open. Maybe something else down the road comes open that he can go and take. But I don't know. It felt kind of like a settling situation. What did you think?
Bryan, that kind of adds into what we were talking about off screen a little bit, which is just that the vibes, to use a young person's term, the vibes just started to feel weird going into that TCU game. I mean, they did. The buzz around Jeff Lebby leaving specifically for Mississippi State started to grow 24 to 48 hours before that TCU game. Then OU put up its best performance of the season, or probably offensive performance of the season, in a game that, like, there wasn't really literally anything to criticize about the offense. Even when the offense was at its best at times, there were still weird play call decisions or weird personnel decisions. There was none of that. The offense just got streamlined, and then, where it was streamlined, it looked good. Then after the game, he not only didn't shoot down the Mississippi State question, he basically he read between the lines. He basically acknowledged that he was interested in the job.
Mm-hmm.
And then for him to I think for him to leave and the way he did, the way he left so quickly, didn't really put out a statement. I mean, by the time people had time to process the news, he was in Starkville.
Yep.
In a move that I'm hesitant to even say this, it kind of felt like Lincoln Riley a little bit. Now, that's a big thing to say. And let me preface by saying the circumstances are not the same, but it's more about Jeff Lebby was just gone by Sunday night, less than 48 hours after OU-TCU. He's gone. He's gone being introduced as the head coach after the vibes had been a little weird, not only all season, but a couple of days before that TCU game. So I'm not comparing him to Lincoln Riley at all. It's just the speed at which it happened made me feel that way. Is that completely off?
No, not at all. I mean, this wasn't an instance where, you have a weird dentist appointment in the middle of the year and then you got people tracking your flights. And it wasn't like that, but I agree. The speed, the tempo with which he left was, it was surprising. And as you said, there wasn't like this, Brent Venables put out the statement about, congratulating him and thanking him for what he did. It just, I don't know. I don't want to call it cookie cutter, but it was just a different feel. So, but I wish him the best of luck. I hope that he does. I mean, I really am pulling for him to have success down there. I think that it's a tough job. He certainly is one of the better offensive minds in the country. And so I think they went back to their roots. Zach Arnett didn't work out. Having a defensive-minded coach didn't work out, but Mike Leach worked out before that. Dan Mullen before him had success there. So maybe an offensive guy is what they need.
Want to make it clear real quick as we end this conversation that I am not saying Jeff Lebby and Lincoln Riley are the same person. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying the circumstances. Not saying the circumstances are the same. It's just it happened really quickly. And like you mentioned, I mean, he didn't really address OU publicly until 24 hours after the news broke, after the parade, after the press conference the following day. Everything just felt a little odd. But look, I think OU feels good about what they've done at offensive coordinator. I think they feel that this is the perfect mix of continuity with maybe with a breath of fresh air moving into the SEC. But there's no doubt that this was a huge hire for Brent Venables. This is risky either way. I mean, Seth Littrell has experience, obviously, but Joe John Finley's never been an offensive coordinator. And there were guys outside the program that they could have looked at and brought in, guys with even more experience than Seth Littrell. There's a risk either way, but this is a huge move for Jeff Lebby to leave, for OU to do this move with Seth Littrell. This is a huge change. Even if some of the similarities that we've talked about, this is a huge thing going into your first year of the SEC. Yep. And so there's a lot to look at here. But again, not saying Jeff Lebby and Lincoln Riley are the same. Okay, I've said that enough. Bryan, I think this weekend is going to be interesting because obviously Oklahoma is outside the Big 12 title game. Mm-hmm. It's Texas and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, just the roach that just stays alive when you think they're dead. When you think they're dead, they are back and alive. But I mean, obviously, kudos to Oklahoma State, who had a couple of moments where it looked like their season was over. I mean, honestly, kudos to them. Oklahoma State, Texas is an interesting game. I think one thing that I've seen a lot is if you're an Oklahoma fan, do you have a rooting outcome? Are you hoping one thing happens over another? Is there any outcome that is better for OU than another outcome? Or is it just kind of your two biggest rivals are in the Big 12 title game, I don't really care who wins?
So Oklahoma State winning 100% locks out the chances of Oklahoma getting into a New Year's Six Bowl, like 100%. If that happens, Oklahoma State takes one of those spots. Texas is still likely, as ridiculous as it seems, probably still ahead of Oklahoma in some way, shape, or form, and is still up for a New Year's Six Bowl. It would be really weird to see how that all played out. So I guess you could say you hope that Texas wins if you're an Oklahoma fan, just so the odds of you maybe making a New Year's Six are a little bit better. I don't know. It's going to be hard for a lot of Oklahoma fans to turn the TV on at 11 o'clock on Saturday and watch that one. I will say, and I don't know if you've experienced this or not. Maybe it's just where I'm from or the people that I'm around, but I'll say that definitely since the Sooners and Longhorns have decided to leave the Big 12, it feels as if those wagons being hitched together has kind of maybe, I don't want to say softened the rivalry, because that's not what's happened, but I think there's less disdain for Texas at this point than there is for Oklahoma State, if that makes sense. Yeah. And maybe I'm the only one hearing or feeling that, but it certainly feels like most of Oklahoma's fan base would be pulling for Texas if there wasn't anything on the line in this game. So I don't know. I mean, that's just how I see it from my perspective. Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I think the OU-Texas rivalry is going to live on in the SEC, but yeah, the fact that they made this decision together, they are kind of attached at the hip, almost just by definition. I think it would be a little hard to swallow if Oklahoma State wins the Big 12 and also won Bedlam on OU's way out the door. I think which, look, you'll get over that. That's not that big of a deal, but I do think that would hurt a little bit, I think, if you're an Oklahoma fan.
Yeah.
Because Oklahoma State already has the last Bedlam thing, which Oklahoma's dominated the series, so maybe it doesn't matter. But the main important thing of all this, despite even the fan angles, is you mentioned it, the bowl game. Oklahoma still has a bowl game to play, and I think the bowl game, which we could talk a lot about what the playoff has done to bowls, has it made some of them irrelevant? I kind of hate that discussion. This bowl game is, whatever bowl game OU makes is going to be important, because they're likely going to be playing a good to, or a decent to good FBS Power 5 opponent. And now this is going to be Seth Littrell and Joe John Finley's first time as a play caller. But Bryan, I know you did a huge deep dive on where OU could land, and it is a little dependent on everything that happens this weekend, not only just in the OSU Texas game, but all the conference title games. The one that it seems to be most commonly projected is OU returning to the Alamo Bowl, like they were there in 2021, and playing a top 15 ranked Arizona team. Is that the most likely scenario, you think? I mean, like on Sunday, that's where OU is going to be announced. Are there other, I mean, is the Fiesta Bowl, is something else at play here, depending on what goes on this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's pretty consensus right now that that's the most likely outcome, is OU Arizona. And I learned yesterday, apparently, so the way that the bowl committees select their teams, I was unaware that there is a one game rule in the Pac-12, where if there is a games gap, more than one game gap between a team that is available and maybe a lower ranked team that the bowl wants to go and get, they can't do that. It has to be one game. So USC being 2 games below Arizona in the standings means they can't take USC if Arizona's available for that game. So I think at this point, unless Arizona was to go to the Holiday Bowl and some different things matched up, USC didn't do well enough to be in a bowl game with Oklahoma this season. So, a lot of people were hoping for that. I thought it was a possibility. I guess it's not. That's the most likely outcome. I will say, don't count Oklahoma out on a New Year's Six bowl just yet. I kind of expect, and maybe this is just wishful thinking, I expect there to be some pretty decent shakeup this week in the rankings. It just feels as if anytime that Texas gets better, Oklahoma obviously is going to be a benefactor of that. And I also think there's a chance that Tulane doesn't win the American. If SMU was to win the American, even without Preston Stone, I think SMU is only a 3.5 point dog in that game. that gives Oklahoma potentially another team that jumped into the top 25 that they have a win over, and an impressive win over. So there are some things that could still shake out. The teams you have to pay attention to, or Oklahoma has to beat out to get into one of those New Year's Six bowls, is Missouri, Ole Miss, and Penn State. Those are the 10-2 teams that you're kind of stuck with. They're all in a group right now, and you have to go past one of those. Oklahoma's prestige and its brand, I think, makes that an interesting conversation, though, because they are in the top 12. There's an opportunity there. It's just going to be a matter of, does the committee see them fit? Which is interesting because Oklahoma's win over Texas is significantly better than any of those other teams that they have. The problem is Oklahoma's losses are to teams that are on a different planet than the teams that have beaten Penn State and Ole Miss.
This is the whole discussion. The reason why we're even talking about this is, as you alluded to, I mean, Oklahoma came in 12th in the college football playoff rankings on Tuesday, which I think it's pretty surprising to be ranked behind all of Missouri, Penn State, and Mississippi in terms of that group of 10-2 teams. That's pretty interesting to me because even after those rankings came out, all of these advanced rankings and different ways of evaluating teams started coming out, and most of them had Oklahoma above most, if not all of them. Yes. And Oklahoma is an interesting team to evaluate in terms of, they have a win against a team that's 7th that might win the Big 12. One of their 2 losses is against an 18th ranked Oklahoma State team that is playing in the Big 12 title game. I think it's really because that Kansas loss doesn't look great now. And that's part of it. But I honestly, Bryan, hate the discussion around. I honestly think it's a good thing to be moving to a 12-team playoff. It's not perfect, but I think it's good because, for one, I think you eliminate discussions like this, and I'm already tired of if Alabama beats Georgia and Texas beats Oklahoma State, who gets, and other stuff shakes out. I mean, what if Oregon loses or whatever? Does Texas get the nod over Alabama? I hate discussions like that. Yeah. I really do. I know that's part of why college football is fun, but to me, it's like, what's the point of Texas beating Alabama?
I can't stand
What's the point of it?
Yeah.
There's no incentive to schedule hard non-conference teams.
Right.
If you're going to put, I know that would mean Alabama beat Georgia, but if that game in September doesn't matter,
then why schedule it?
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. And I don't care about Alabama being a better team than they were in September. They had a chance to beat them in Alabama and didn't. I don't, how else, I think we make things too complicated sometimes.
Agreed. Yeah.
I think we make things too complicated. And also, I am dying for a playoff system that is less about subjectivity, because to me, you even look at Oklahoma's part in the rankings. I think you could make an argument they deserve to be over literally all of those other 10-2 teams.
Yep.
I'm not saying that's a 100% airtight argument, but you could make that.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just think by this time of year, the discussion becomes so weird, and I hate that it's so subjective and everybody has different biases. I don't know.
There should be more the BCS wasn't perfect, but it got it right more often than not because of the numbers. So there needs to be, we've gone too far to subjectivity, not enough objectivity.
Yeah.
For example, why in the hell is Oregon ranked above Texas? I'm not, this is an Oklahoma podcast. I understand. Why is Oregon ranked above Texas when they both played Texas Tech? Texas Tech held on with Oregon. The score was 38-30. Oregon won. Texas just beat the Red Raiders 57-7.
Yeah.
And then when they were asked about that, when Boo Corrigan was asked about that, the college football playoff committee chair, he just talked about how dominant Oregon was. And it's like, it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And I could get off on a tangent that would take us down a rabbit hole that you don't want any part of. So I will leave it at that. But I'm excited about the one thing on the 12-team playoff that I cannot wait for: playoff games on campuses.
Yeah,
that is going to be awesome. I am so excited about that.
Well, and to me, no, 100%. I think that's just going to add so much to the atmosphere. But to me, I like a system that kind of is based on both subjectivity and objectivity, kind of like college basketball. Like there are ways objectively to get in that you're in the field.
Yeah.
And then some other ways, because I think college isn't the pros. College football is not the NFL. It's run completely differently. But
well, they're getting paid like it now, Jesse. So it is.
I set myself up for that. But I think I like the idea of having something that is not completely based on the opinion of a committee. I like Texas. It's going to really hurt, I think, if you're a Texas fan and you win this weekend and you finish as a 12-1 champion of the Big 12 and you don't get in. Or if you don't get in because a team you beat earlier that was probably the signature win of the entire regular season among any team, you don't get put in above them because they started playing better over the second. I'm ready for some objectivity. That's what I'm ready for. But when it comes to Oklahoma, like you said, I think the Alamo Bowl is probably the most likely outcome, but there are things that could happen this weekend that could shake that up. Absolutely. And I don't think there's anything wrong with making the Alamo Bowl, especially if you play a team like Arizona, a good ranked Arizona team. But man, I think if you're an Oklahoma fan capping off the season with a New Year's Six Bowl after 6 and 7 last season,
yeah,
it feels pretty good.
The Peach Bowl against Missouri, or go playing Washington in the Fiesta Bowl or something like that would be a lot of fun. And I think that would be a good thing for the Sooner Nation after, it would help people realize you're 10-2. You're in a New Year's Six Bowl because you had a good season. So it's easier to tell them that instead of, well, you're going to the Alamo Bowl. Yeah. It just, I don't know. It just feels different. So
it does. We shall see, Brian. But again, it's never boring in Norman. It's at the very least, it is never boring in Norman, especially the last 2 years. There's never been a dull moment. This weekend should bring a lot more excitement. Brian, that is going to do for us here at the Oklahoma Drill. Appreciate everybody tuning in with us every week. As usual, you can find us. You can find an episode from Bryan and I every single week, typically on Thursdays, anywhere you get your podcasts or over at the OU Insider YouTube channel. If you're not an OU Insider VIP, head on over to ouinsider.com. You will find so much content from Bryan and I, from our recruiting guys, Parker and Brandon. Basketball season's underway right now. You'll find plenty of content about that from me and Brody. You'll get access to message boards. You'll get access to all kinds of behind the scenes footage that you can really only get over at ouinsider.com. But if not, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. There's so much content on this YouTube channel that you don't want to miss. At the top of that list, of course, is the Oklahoma Drill with Bryan and I. Bryan, before we leave real quick, do you have a prediction? Big 12 title game. Who wins?
Texas 45, Oklahoma State 20.
45. Okay. I think that's the most likely outcome. But Oklahoma State, as soon as you count them out, they do something.
Fair enough.
They do something. But everybody, as always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see what happens this weekend, and we'll see you guys next week.